Hi, welcome to At Home. I'm Kevin Barthel. Today, I have a fun craft project to share with you, quilted boxes. Now this is a crazy quilt pattern, and crazy quilts were made in the old days from random scraps of fabric made of all different shapes and colors, waste not, want not. I'm going to show you how to cheat and easily create your own. This is the box I'm going to use. You can purchase these in any craft store. You could also use a nice heavy-duty shoebox. The size and the shape is left up to you. Now our first step is to take this outside and give the inside a nice coat of spray paint. Now while that dries, I can get my fabric pieces together. Now these are pieces of fabric I had left over from other projects, and I tore them roughly into the same length. So now all I need to do is sew them together. So let's head over to the sewing machine. So I'm just taking my strips of fabric right sides together, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm just going to follow the edge of the presser foot and sew all the strips together. All my strips of fabric are sewn together in one nice big piece. So now our next step is to cut it apart. And to do that, I'm going to use my yardstick and my rotary cutter. You want to make sure you have a cutting mat down first, or you're going to scratch the hell out of your countertops. We're just going to make a nice diagonal cut. And now that I've made that diagonal cut, I'm going to take this piece and lay it over the other and bring my edges together, and I'm going to re-sew this. Here are the two pieces sewn back together, and you can see how the crazy quilt pattern is going to start to take shape. So now I'm just going to repeat that process, cut it on another random diagonal, and sew it back together until I get a pattern that I like. I've cut and sewn, cut and sewn, cut and sewn, and put together my crazy quilt top. My next step is to make a pattern for my lid. And to do that, I took my lid and a piece of paper, and I traced the lid onto the paper. Then I measured 1/2 inch around my lid so that I have a nice seam allowance, 1/2 inch seam allowance onto my pattern. So I'm going to take this and lay this onto my fabric piece. And I'll pin it into place. And then cut it out. And now, here's my crazy quilt lid. The entire box is covered in fabric. So now I can start assembling those pieces. But the first thing I need to do is mark where my lid comes down on my box. I'm going to do a very faint pencil line all the way around, and this will come in handy at a later step. All right, so I'm covered with my line all the way around. I'm going to measure that. This box is 4 inches. But my lid comes down 1 inch. So that means I have 3 inches of surface to cover. So I've cut this piece of fabric 4 inches wide because I need a seam allowance at the top 1/2 inch, and I need a seam allowance at the bottom that's 1/2 inch. So I'm going to wrap the box with my piece of 4 inch fabric. And I'm going to pin it in place. I'm not even measuring what the circumference of the box is. I'm just going to pin this because each one might be a little different. And this gives me my tube of fabric. And then what I can do is take this over to the sewing machine and stitch across right where my pins are, so it's going to be a nice tight fit. And I'm going to do the same thing with a piece that will attach to my lid. Now, even though the lid is only an inch wide, this piece I ripped at about 2.5 inches because I'll need to be able to pull the lid down, and this will help me have some extra to pull on, because if I cut it at 1 inch, it'd be too tight and I wouldn't be able to pull it down. So this is ready to sew. I'll take this over to the sewing machine. I use my pattern to cut out a piece of black fabric that's going to go on the bottom of the box. So with this tube that's going to cover the sides of the box, I need to pin this together, right sides together. It's going to be difficult to see this on camera because it's so dark, but I'm going to pin it right sides together, and I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the bottom. So I'm just going to work my way around the entire bottom and putting my pins in at about 1/2 inch to mark where I'm going to sew. So now I can sew that. I'm going to repeat the process on the lid and its strip. The bottom piece of my box cover is finished. I took the top edge of it and I folded it over 1/2 inch, and I top stitched along the edge to give it a nice finished edge. My lid is also finished, and I did decorative embroidery stitching along all the seams of the fabric. I'm going to show you how to do this. Now, this is a step that you could skip if you really wanted to, but I like how it finishes off the piece. Now, decorative embroidery stitching is traditional with crazy quilts. There are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different examples of embroidery stitches out there. Now, you can find little booklets or pamphlets at the fabric store to demonstrate how to do all of these stitches. But today I'm going to demonstrate how to do a blanket stitch. I find it the easiest. You're going to need embroidery floss and an embroidery needle. And the first thing you're going to do is knot the end of your embroidery floss, and then in the seam, you're going to bring your embroidery needle up, and then you're going to go over about 1/4 inch on a diagonal. Leave that loose, and then parallel to that second stitch, you're going to come up through the seam again, and you're going to loop through and hook it and pull it tight. And then you're going to repeat that again. A variation of the stitch is you can do it at different lengths or closer together. Any pattern is possible. So none of it's hard. It just takes some coordination and some time, but it really helps finish off an edge. This is the part of the project I always love, when your prep work is done and the entire thing can come together. So our first thing we're going to do is take our bottom cover and slip it over our box. It's a nice tight fit, but not so tight that you're going to have to struggle too hard. And remember that line we drew around there with the pencil before? We're going to use that line to make sure that we keep our edge straight. I'm going to start by adding a little bit of hot glue, and I'm going to bring the fabric up to my line, hold it in place and let it dry a little bit. And I'm going to continue to do that all the way around the box. One thing to watch out for is try and get all your seam junk tucked onto the bottom of the box instead of around the edge. It makes for a nicer fit. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the lid, but I like to add a piece of batting onto the lid just to give it that nice cushy top. I'm just going to throw some hot glue on there real quick to hold this in place. And do exactly the same thing with the lid. And this is where that little bit of extra fabric along your band is going to come in handy, because you'll be able to really pull the lid nice and tight. So the lid's all glued on, and I want to trim off all that extra fabric now that we left, because we don't need it anymore. And then the last thing I want to do is take some decorative trim and glue this around the edge of the box. It just finishes that lid off. And also, when I glue it on, I'm going to let it hang over about halfway so that it covers up any imperfections along the seam between the lid and the outer cover of the box. And when I get to the end, I want to fold it over so it has a nice finished edge to the trim. It's overlapping about 1/2 inch over on the top of the other end of the trim. Get all my hot glue spider webs out of here. There we have our finished product. Here are some examples of other boxes that I've done. Here's a cute little square one. And then this one I covered in wool, and I actually lined the inside of the box with fabric as well. But I gave this to my best friend, and he keeps his sewing kit in it, that emergency kit for when a button pops off a shirt. Then this one I made for my aunt a few Christmases ago, and I got very elaborate with all my embroidery stitching, but also with some hand beading. These boxes make impressive gifts and can help you clean out your fabric bin, but not your wallet. They can be used just as decoration, or they can hold precious cargo. Oh, animal! How'd you get in there? Oh, mwah. Well, thanks for joining me at home. See you next time. Say bye, animal. Bye! If you have any suggestions, comments, project ideas, or even photos of your own projects you'd like to share, please feel free to visit the At Home Facebook page. I'd love to hear from you.